2020 has been a fuck for old games. Given my strict criteria for what a new game is, any remasters, re-releases or ports of games from before 2020 would qualify for this list as opposed to the main GOTY list. And that has to contend with all the stuff I've picked up, come back to or stumbled upon within the last year. And 2020 has relied heavily on pre-existing games. There have been long gaps between the properly new releases, and publishers and audiences have been turning to old games more often to fill their entertainment schedules. Even stuff as recent as 2019 that was a little slow to try fall into the old games category. With this in mind, I've had to stop myself from covering Mario Super Picross, Burnout Revenge, The Orange Box, Portal 2, Crazy Taxi 3, Curve and Squash, Street Skater 2, Jumping Flash, Beatmania, No More Heroes, The Legend of Zelda Spirit Tracks, Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition, Duke Nukem 3D World Tour, Part-Time UFO, Hotline Miami, and who knows what else, just to make this content somewhat manageable. I'm not even going to do a Splatoon segment this year. That's how tight it is. We're just talking about the real highlights. The most important old games of the year. Right, let's start. I've talked about Type 4 in one of these before, but I can't help to find new ways to grab my interest. At the start of the year, I had the good fortune to come across an immaculate £10 Negicon, Namco's PlayStation launch era twisting controller. It's a quirky enthusiast device, and it's precisely the kind of thing I tend to find appreciation for. Twisting each side of the controller allows the player a much more specific level of control than rocking an analog stick from side to side. It's amazing that this thing came out long before analog controllers, because it outshines them so dramatically for racing games. And using one has made the already brilliant Ridge Racer Type 4 so much better. I know Type 4 marketing put all the focus on the Joy-Con, and I think that controller's fun too, but the Negicon is where it's at. Holding an angle between both hands is much easier than trying the same with a single thumb, and there's much more distinction between different angles. Using it gives you much more control over how you drift a corner, how quickly to enter and exit a turn, and makes success feel more satisfyingly earned. It gives you the confidence to challenge tougher races and get much more out of the game. It's not solely the success of the controller though. I've tried it on all sorts of different games, and their support for the controller can feel wildly varied depending on the developer's approach. It feels really good in the original Ridge Racer, while Wipeout 3 feels fast and loose in a way that complements the feel of the game's ships. But Ridge Racer is so twitchy and flippant with an Negicon, it's barely playable. Type 4 is a unique joy with the Negicon, and it shows the team's reverence for the controller in spite of the publisher pushing a new model that it's thrown a ton of money into producing. If you love Type 4, I seriously recommend a Negicon, and if you own one, I seriously recommend using it for Ridge Racer Type 4. I'm now petitioning Bandai Namco to produce a twisting Joy-Con grip for the Switch. Early in the year, I also had the good fortune to come across an original Xbox One for £50. And with the new generation coming in, I'd recommend looking out for some similar deals unless you're that fussed about next-gen AAA Xbox exclusives. I'm not, and it runs all the Game Pass indie games and backwards compatible titles just fine. The one exclusive I really liked though, Crackdown III of all things. Poor old Crackdown. Somewhere along the line people lost their taste for stupid games. Games like the old Grand Theft Auto and Splatterhouse. No moralising or philosophy, just big brick wall dumb fun. Crackdown 3 committed the sin of being incredibly stupid. It's garish and repetitive and obnoxious, but it's pop. Your decision making in Crackdown 3 doesn't come down to playing your part in a story, but scattershot flights of fancy. Seeing something you could do that looks like fun, jumping into it and immediately dropping it when something else catches your eye. There's a niche for this stuff that Just Cause and Saints Row don't fulfill. Crackdown 3's long-time goals aren't about fighting back corrupt organisations or gaining popular influence. I mean, that stuff's in the story, but Crackdown's story feels like it was designed to be ignored. It's about picking up collectible trinkets and gaining flashy new powers. Crackdown 3 is a sprawling playground of dumb with its impossible skyscrapers and suspended motorways. Many have criticised the game for feeling dated. I love retro shit, this is a barrel full of it. Maybe there's something tragic in this, growing older and continually revisiting years of our youth. Yakuza does such a determined job of painting the picture of contemporary society in the year their stories were set in, that replaying older ones comes with an extra layer of nostalgia. I've meant to replay Yakuza 3 and 4 for ages, They were my entry point into the series, and I loved them when I first played them, but I kinda tuned out for a lot of the story. I knew Kazuma Kiryu was a cool tough guy, and Goro Majima was a big dafty who kept contriving excuses to fight him, but that's about all the understanding of the backstory that Osmosis had granted me. Now that I've played both Kiwamis, I've got a much better appreciation for who each character is, and why they're in the situations they're in. I'm now able to appreciate why Daigo is so significant, why Kazuma would open an orphanage, and even occasionally remember which organisation is which. I've long insisted that new players shouldn't fret too much about which Yakuza game they start out on, but replaying these games has helped me see the other side of the argument. It's something of a moot point these days, because you should absolutely start with the Yakuza 0 anyway, but I've been able to appreciate a new side of the games now that I know the surrounding story. I still think each game is largely self-contained, not so much for 6, but familiarising yourself with the characters' backstories really does add to your appreciation. Worthwhile.
With the Xbox One in tow, it was time to get back into Skate 3, and I most certainly did.
Having a new console that sat on my shelf almost solely to play Skate 3, I was on it every day for months. I originally played the game on 360, and it was likely my biggest regret when I sold the console. Regaining access to my digital library meant getting my old save, DLC and homemade parks back. Skate 3 is a game I can play for hours, just milling about and finding new things to try, or just retreading the most familiar areas and trying to do something better on them. It's the most content-filled skateboarding game ever made, and there's always some long-forgotten aspect that will strike my fascination the moment I think of it again. Playing on Xbox One meant losing access to the old-school custom soundtracks feature, where you played MP3s stored in the hard drive, but opened up better alternatives. Nobody talks about the feature, but if you put in a CD while you're playing a game from the hard drive, it'll play alongside the game. It's been a great excuse for me to explore my old collection again. If that's not enough, you've also got access to Spotify while playing the game. While I'm excited about the potential of Skate 4 XL in session, they can't match Skate for scale or spectacle. If you want to perform moves with more intricacy, they'll do the job, but if you want to bomb down the full length of a huge aqueduct, there's simply no other option. Skate 4 is the one game I can point to when asked why I needed a next-gen console. I've already touched on how good the PS5's backwards compatibility is when discussing games I was already playing through, but it's encouraged me to revisit a few PS4 games that I'd already played too. Performance boosts vary depending on how each game was built, but those that ignore resolution and frame rate caps are completely transformed on PS5. Going back to Vanquish on PS3 really shows how much of a struggle it was for the console, but getting the new release and playing it on PS5 is incredible. Beyond that, what it does for The Last Guardian, when you disable patches, is amazing. I'm one of those who tends to wince at frame rate and resolution arguments in modern games, but if you can make Trico seem more real, that's added value I can really appreciate. It feels like the game got the same treatment that Ico and Shadow of the Colossus got on PS3, and no additional development was required. Sony have finally made a console that's really good at playing PS4 games. I'm not really excited about much of the PS5's upcoming library, but if you're into scruffy PS4 games, you've got a lot to explore on the console already. Definitely one of the highlights of this year's releases for me. Having a game on the Switch is often a transformative experience. It's rare that you're given the opportunity to explore the extent of that with games as good as the 3D Marios. I have plenty of stern words to throw towards Sunshine, and some gentle words of criticism for Mario 64. But throw them on an HD handheld with a brilliant sleep mode function and much of that dissipates. These games weren't intended to be torn through, but appreciated in wee chunks over the course of weeks. You have to learn the precise dynamics of the triple jump or flood spray before you can confidently take on a lot of the game's challenges. If you played them before, it's great to be able to have these games on the side and come back to them every now and then. I definitely wouldn't recommend new players go through the trial of buying an old GameCube to play the messy, early 2000s platformer that is Super Mario Sunshine, but whether I like it or not, it stands as something of a rite of passage for Mario fans, and it's far more palatable here. Galaxy's easily my favourite game of the three, but it's also the one that comes off worst for its transition to the Switch. It's still quite enjoyable if you can overlook the changes in hardware, but if you're buying a game just to play Galaxy again, I'd strongly recommend that you consider picking up a Wii copy first. 3D All-Stars isn't really the ideal version of itself, but it's an interesting form for it, and it's got a lot of unique appeal as a result. Pikmin 3 is a precious game for me. There's a reason why Miyamoto keeps pushing Pikmin to be a hit. It's not just because he's really proud of the gameplay. It's built on what he hopes to inspire young people to find passion in. It's a gentle, post-apocalyptic scenario filled with ideas about the ethics of power structures, the need for scientific development, and the wonder of the natural world. I'll typically roll my eyes at anyone who tries to evaluate Nintendo games by their reading of their subtext, but the stuff in Pikmin is so good, and it really adds to my appreciation of who Shigeru Miyamoto is. The gameplay is built on the back of Nintendo's biggest successes, with Zelda-like dungeons and puzzles, and Mario movement, bounce and charm. Playing the game on the Switch didn't really change how I feel about the game, though it did make a lot of the side content much more appealing. I don't think it works quite as well without the ridiculous Wii Remote nunchuck gamepad setup, but it's given the game access to a far wider audience, and I feel duty-bound to promote the game every chance I get. If you enjoy the work I put into GOTY content and you'd like to show your appreciation in some way, all I ask is that you consider downloading the demo. I was originally going to include this in the proper 2020 list, but decided that classing this as a new game seemed out of step with the game's intention. This is a compilation of old games, lovingly presented and sometimes added to in a way akin to the best ports from M2 or Headcanon. The quality of the game doesn't reflect on 2020 Nintendo's design, but the respect for the historical games that led to what they work on today. It's the sort of Nintendo project that used to come into being because it was mandated by Yamauchi. If you have a device that plays games, it had better be able to play Go. The kind of notion that their core audience might get a bit sniffy about, but there's truth to it. If you're carrying around a Switch everywhere, there's often situations where Connect 4 or drafts are more appealing prospects than Smash Brothers. It's easy to picture Nintendo developers taking pride in having the opportunity to introduce new audiences to all these culturally significant games from all over the world. It's not just a game to buy in case you're ever stuck on a train with your auntie though. There's enough options in here that you'll always find something you'd like to play whenever you think to turn it on. There's even some legitimately video gaming options, if you're that narrow-minded. This is the only way to play Wii Sports Bowling on Nintendo's newest console after all. It's weird, but one of my most played games on the Switch this past year has been Spider Solitaire. I mean, don't worry, I use the Mario cards. As much as I'm loath to give Activision any sort of presence in these features, it wouldn't be right of me to ignore this. Tony Hawk's 2 runs deep in my veins. A game I once played start to finish before my pal was back from dinner. I'm not willing to get hyperbolic about this, but it is the new go-to version of these games. They've pulled a few wee things from the sequels, and they're all really well considered. I know many felt that things got too complicated after 3, but wall plants and spine transfers really add to your options when finding new lines to attempt. And we don't have to worry about any of the momentum-killing silliness of thugs, cavemans. The real appeal of THPS 1 and 2 for me is just having online leaderboards. I know you can play in rooms of active competitors, but Tony Hawk's, and particularly the first 2 games, is about the 2-minute high score runs. Those were the agreed upon rules we all worked with. The validation of knowing where I place among the top School 2 players is all that I needed from this. Now, put it on the Switch so I can give it some real dedication. I'm not going to get into details about how or why I have this, but it's currently in my house and that's something to celebrate. Steel Battalion is known almost solely for its massive, ludicrous controller, and it's easy to see why, but I think that does the game a disservice. This is a game for mecha otaku. Folk who want a game that treats operating a mech in the same way Gran Turismo handles professional racing. You have control over windscreen wipers, external camera displays, and an analog radio frequency tuner to maintain contact with your commanding officer. If all that sounds a bit bewildering, you can always consult the huge A4 technical handbook that comes with the game. Missions are treated with the utmost seriousness as you methodically start your machine, flipping all the switches and managing the gears as you gradually approach the active battlefield. It puts you in the right mindset for fights that often come down to deliberate manoeuvres and being in the right places at the right time. It goes without saying, but I'm dreadful at the game. Nevertheless, the sensation of barely scraping by when all these lights and alarms are going off in a 90-degree radius in front of you, it's still a great time. There's a hardcore audience for Steel Battalion who maintain private line of conflict servers, so it's clear that you can learn to play the game competently if you buckle down. I feel guilty having such easy access to the game and still being so shit at it, but you know, I still enjoy it whenever I pull it out. This is the year I finally gave Jumping Flash a proper shot. When I last tried a decade or so ago, it wasn't my thing. In the intervening years, the low poly surrealism and experimental design of early 3D titles has grown much more charming and interesting. Jumping Flash 1 is amusing, but scruffy and often not much fun. The sequel is really where it dug into its potential and presented it as a more cohesive package. The first game felt like a product of people who had no idea what they were working with, and the level designs didn't work terribly well with Robot's moveset. In the second, they find their feet a bit, and platforms are arranged much more logically, and levels generally feel much more purposefully designed. It's like the jump from Tekken 1 to Tekken 2 or Ridge Racer to Ridge Racer Revolution. The original's a bit of a proof of concept, but the sequel feels like what they intended to make. The theming feels more cohesive too, and thankfully that doesn't mean it's any less stupid. The second you see Captain Kabuki, you'll know why I'd be into Jumping Flash 2. Mario's design was born of the limitations of a 12 by 16 pixel space, but Jumping Flash characters feel purely like the result of a lack of experience working with 3D modelling. If it was a readable shape and it had some appeal, it stayed in. It's like they made a game out of clip art, and I love it. The sense of early 3D work runs through the Jumping Flash games, and it lends it such a scruffy charm, like 90s simulator rides or Amiga demo scene projects. There's also a lot of that weird Japanese property localised as a Saturday morning cartoon vibe that we got a lot of in the early 90s. Essentially, don't touch the game if you're under 30. If you grew up around The Lawnmower Man and Wowzer though, you might see a lot in this that speaks to you on a level that Crash Bandicoot doesn't scratch. The year's been good for PlayStation nostalgia. I haven't been so conscious of how much I love the PS1 for a while, and it really benefits a stupid wee game like Jumping Flash 2. I usually prop up one of these as my old game of the year, but most of this list has been stuff I'd played before. Jumping Flash 2 is by no means my favourite game on the list, and it's likely the one I'd have the biggest struggle recommending to a general audience, but it's been the biggest discovery for me personally. So I guess I'll give it the title. Well done, Robert.